Hello again, and welcome to The Challenge We Face with Quacy Smith. I am your host, Kathleen Harris, and we are here today with the one and only Quacy Smith, the candidate, Democratic official candidate for Congress in CD9. Hello, Quacy.
Hi, Kathleen. How are you?
Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Doing
Excellent,
well.
excellent. Good to see you again.
Always.
So, we are going to have a very special episode today about the Second Amendment. This is a topic that is often brought up on the campaign trail and in discussions with voters along the way, and specifically where it involves the right to bear arms in this country. I think a lot of folks want to know where Quacy stands on this. Just gun rights or gun control, hot topics in the country. And so let's turn to Quacy and find out where he stands.
Well, I'm sitting right now. No, no. This is a obviously a very fluid conversation, and I would let me first of all say I with my police background as a former police officer, a United States Marine, I'm a gun guy. I own firearms, and I like going to to the shooting ranges and shooting rounds and whatnot, and yeah, it's my career has been raised around firearms and guns, and so I'm a gun guy. And again, I want to be clear up front. I support the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Yeah, I did. And I say that up front because something that is so enshrined into the fabric of our nation, it's a mammoth job to try to disturb it. There's an old adage that says it takes a lot of water to turn around a big ship. And to our Republican friends, actually, and I think unbeknownst to many of them, there are a lot of Democrats like me that are gun owners that, you know what I mean, because of military or police involvement or whatever this stuff. And
personal protection.
Personal protection. We're going to come in and take all of our guns. Well, no, we're not. First of all, no, we're not going to do that. Second of all, no, we can't do that because there's no law to support coming in, taking in, all of your guns and all of that stuff. And so I think that's fanciful, and fantasy doesn't comport very well into reality.
Let's debunk it right away.
Yeah, nobody's coming to take your guns,
That's
and
right.
it would be all-out chaos to try to do it. In fact, I think you would create a whole nother rung of criminal activity if you did it. Okay, and we can talk more about that here. But when it comes down to the issue of guns, I think there are three different pots, and I think they all get thrown into the pot together, particularly by folks on our side of the aisle, Democrats, for political expediency. And just like I'll call out the other side when they're wrong about something like border security, I'll call out our side when they're wrong. You can't throw all of that stuff in one pot for the sake of political expediency. And a lot of, Democratic messaging is centered around that, and I think it misses the mark. That's just my opinion. Yes, I'm a Democrat, but I'm saying it misses the mark. There are three separate issues: Second Amendment rights and protections, gun violence, and public safety.
Sure.
Those are three separate, completely distinct issues. The only common thread between them is firearms. That's it. But there are three separate. The Second Amendment says folks can carry, guns, within the laws of their country. They have a right to bear arms. And I think even as it relates to that, we have to be careful about using inflammatory rhetoric and posturing about things that the country is not going to agree to right now. And Republicans and independents and some Democrats, they don't want stuff shoved down their throat. People are tired of this political whiplash That's what it is, political whiplash. When the Dems are in, it's political whiplash. We're banning assault weapons and everybody's getting everything at free, and then Republicans getting off, and then it's political whiplash back the other way. Y'all, our necks are hurting. You know what I mean? We can't turn our heads because you're hurting, the neck of the country with this political whiplash concerning these things that as a politician is not going to happen, and you're harming the people. The whole Second Amendment thing is one of them, frankly. It's one of them. We're banning that's, why would you? The political outcry, the public outcry for that is going to be so distinct. And right now, 2024, we're not at a place where we can have that conversation, in my estimation. Not that conversation, not right now. Because you're going to leave at least half of the nation behind. And that's not how you govern. You take as many people with you on the issues that you can. Now, I know this sounds more like I'm running for president, but I'm not. I'm just running for CD9. You get to the place where the majority of the people are going with you. Let me give an example, specifically as it relates to the Second Amendment. Let's step away from we're banning assault rifles, because it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And if you did it, the public outcry would be so horrible. And then the next term that comes along, when the other party's in place, they're going to do nothing but overturn it anyway. And so now you're back and forth, and the people are confused. Okay? So let's set that aside for a moment. And I know there are people that agree with that and disagree with that, and that's fine. That's why this is the nature of of our country. You can agree or disagree. But let's get back to something that the majority of Americans agree to concerning Second Amendment. They agree you have a right to bear arms, Constitution. Here's something we all agree to. Republican or Democrat alike, independent alike. We don't want criminals having access to guns. 90% or more of citizens of this country would agree. And the 10% that don't agree would probably be the 10% of the people that couldn't have them because of their criminal background. I've talked to Republicans. I'm talking about way deep white Republicans. They agree, absolutely. They want these people, with guns. So we can agree on that. But how do you determine whether someone has a criminal background or not? What's the only way to determine that?
You might check.
You might do a background check. So if you agree that we don't want bad folks having guns, and the only way to know whether someone's a bad folk is to do a background check, then by default, you would agree that we probably need to have some type of universal background check for anybody that's trying to buy a gun so that we can fulfill an objective that we all agree to. Here's something that we all agree to. We all agree that we don't want folks with documented mental health issues having access to firearms. Democrats, independent, unaffiliated voters, Republicans alike, we all agree to this. You crazy? No. You don't get to have a gun. You're suffering some of the mental, illness, because there's a difference between crazy and mental illness. Crazy, these folks are just crazy. There's mental illness or something else. You know what I mean?
Sure,
but
absolutely.
These folks should not have firearms. We agree to that, Republicans, Democrats, independent alike, for a number of reasons. But then you would agree that if there is some concerns about the mental health of folks, that the people who are selling guns need to know it if those folks are trying to buy guns. It doesn't matter whether they're high-capacity magazines, handguns, firearms. We need to know this stuff. Everybody agrees to that. The only way you find that out is if you have red flag laws, background checks for stuff. If we agree that this is the right outcome, then why isn't bipartisan legislation being passed to further what we all agree to? Do you know why? Because of big money interests.
Sure.
Entities like the NRA.
Absolutely.
The biggest threat to the Second Amendment for the Republican or the folks that like guns, like the biggest threat to your Second Amendment right is not the Democratic Party. Your biggest threat to your Second Amendment rights is the NRA. You're in the bed with the enemy. And people that don't have guns keep getting guns. Folks with mental illnesses keep getting guns because the NRA has bought a whole political party.
Sure. And it's a shell of what it used to be.
Absolutely.
I mean, the downfall has been swift.
Absolutely. Because the agreement of the people are there that these things are reasonable. And so, as it relates to that, the Second Amendment protection, it's enshrined in the Constitution. You leave that alone. I think there are some conversations that you don't have right now, 2024. We're not having that conversation. But let's talk about the stuff that the majority of us do agree to and that we all can go along with. Universal background checks, red flag laws, closing the loophole for the black market and online sales of firearms. These are practical considerations that we can do. Making sure that our law enforcement officers that are out there on the street have the ability to protect themselves.
Yes.
Putting infrastructure in places where our schools are more protected so that we're not having these kinds of mass shootings and all of that stuff. So there are things that we can do. But again, you're going to have to address them in three separate pots. Second Amendment, that's an issue of itself that has to be delicately treated. That's a constitutional right. And there'll be several constitutional challenges. Public safety, not just for citizens, schools, police officers, all of that stuff. We have to address that. What are gun laws now throughout the states, federal gun laws? Are they commensurate with making sure that you have, or let me say it this way, do they have a deterrent effect on folks committing crimes with guns? Because if you don't have a deterrent effect on the laws, then you're going to have people that keep committing crimes. And again, we saw something happen here recently in the news that's unprecedented, where a mother and father were held liable for what their son did with
Right.
this is unprecedented
In
this
Michigan,
country.
yes.
Yeah, and as a lawyer, I won't get into it, you know what I mean, but it was very interesting that now you have courts that are willing to advance that liability to parents for not doing what they reasonably ought to do as it relates to keeping their kid from going and shooting up a bunch of other folks, at a school.
Sure.
It begs the question as to where is this line of thinking going to go from here as far as liability is concerned. That goes to the issue of public safety. Is that something that should be considered? Did the court in Michigan go too far? Is this something that we're going to let be ferreted out state by state? Or is it something that on the federal level, on federal lands and all of that stuff where, that something that needs to be given guidance, you have these, when Congress gives guidance, like, hey, this is what we think, should be done related to things. Of course, states can make their own laws and whatnot, but that was a very interesting ruling.
It surely was. Yeah. And I think also it depends on the facts of the case.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're the lawyer, so I defer to you, but I will say, having followed the case, the parents, not only did they not prevent this young man, they enabled him.
Absolutely.
They purchased a gun for him when they knew that he was exhibiting mental concerns. So very interesting case to follow,
Absolutely.
and we'll see how that develops in terms of legal liability for parents in
Sure.
other situations. I will say that we should probably address a topic that is within the framework of this arena of sort of gun rights that's been brought up quite a bit on the campaign trail. And I think that specifically in the 9th District, district, where we have a good mix of rural areas and urban areas. So to our citizens who live in rural areas, I think they in particular want to make sure that their guns will be protected.
Absolutely.
So if you can speak to that, having grown up in a rural setting.
I grew up in a rural area. They had guns. Still go to the rural area now. Have guns. I don't want your guns. I'm not. We're taking everybody's gun. I'm not supporting taking folks' guns. It's a constitutional right, and we are not at a place as a nation right now where we can even have that conversation. So, Quacy Smith, if Quacy Smith is the congressman in CD9. We're not doing that. Now, Quacy Smith will fully and always support universal background checks, fully and always support red flag laws. Absolutely. We must. I'm going to support every initiative to make sure that our police officers have the safety, equipment, and resources, more officers on the street. I'm going to support it every single time. Make sure that our schools are safe and protected, whatever that looks like. We don't want our schools to look like jails where we have 1,700 school resource officers, but whatever we need to be for protection. I have children that go to Millennium High School right now. They have to walk through metal detectors to go into class.
Wow.
That's something that I would have never thought about when I was, in high school 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
Plus, but anyway. But this is something I would have never thought, you know what I mean? And so this is an evolving thing. My children have to be taught how to, this is what you do when an active shooter comes in.
Sure.
We have a problem, and it's public safety, but we have to peel back the layers of political ambition and deal with what's in front of us. Have some more fact-finding missions, bipartisan fact-finding efforts and initiatives. Go talk to educators and school teachers and school administrators and find out what are the best practices to make sure that our schools across the nation are safe, making sure that we're giving funding to these school districts, particularly those in lower income communities that can't afford to go to a school like my kids go to that has metal detectors and all of that stuff. Let's make sure we're putting our money where our mouth is while we're doing all this political talking. Let's make sure we're taking care of what matters the most. And again, with gun safety laws, a gun is never jumped off of a table and shot anybody by itself. I promise you that. It never jumped off a table and pointed itself at somebody and fired itself. Behind every death has been a person. That's why it's called homicide, the death of one human being at the hands of another human being. And until you address those underlying causes, you'll still have this onslaught of what we term as gun violence. To that end, when it comes to gun violence, again, it is, it has been a problem for years. Under this president's administration, and take my word for it, crime rates have gone down quite significantly. And again, kudos to, local law enforcement and governors and mayors and whatever policies the president and Congress have passed. But, stuff has gone down, despite what you're being told, and the country's going to hell in a handbasket, and everything is raw, and crimes and folks dying in the streets. No, the numbers don't lie. You're not entitled to your own facts. Crime rates are going down.
That's right.
And why would we not celebrate that as a country, that it's going down, no matter who's in office?
In fact, President Biden and the administration had a recent win. It was just in the news a few days ago about closing that gun show loophole and being able to enact legislation to address this problem. Sure. I think, we, at some point, this is probably not the right episode for this, but we do need to talk about President Biden's accomplishments, because I feel like they get lost in the conversation.
Absolutely. He's done. There's some things that the president has done that have been remarkable. You know what I mean? And as every president, there's some things that President Trump did that were good. There's some things that a lot of good President Obama did, and President Bush, and so forth. Down the line. Because there's a certain standard that we've, and I certainly don't want to get down that rabbit. But there's a certain standard that we have held for our leaders and how they present themselves in public. And I think that's what America's trying to get back to, is to that standard. And so, and we'll get to, talk to those issues about, President Biden and others. But again, to this issue about, gun safety, I think we have to also address some of the mental health concerns, mental health and guns. There needs to be a forum related to that where we really get down into it and discuss it and come out with solutions, not just talk, but solutions as to how we deal with this in schools, families. How we empower our police officers to deal with it. Police officers aren't social workers. And they're there to deal with immediate threat to life and property and whatnot. And sometimes they're confronted with someone that's having a mental health issue, and they're already strapped, they're already down officers, they're already, for a number of reasons. And it's something that we're going to have to address immediately, simply to keep our officers safe on the streets when it comes down to guns, particularly in a state like Arizona where you open carry. You got folks walking in the grocery store with a gun on their hip.
Right.
And so these are things that we have to adjust. But again, we can't, my statement to this, and we can have more conversation about this later, we cannot lose ourselves in this conversation for the sake of political expediency. Those are three separate things. The common thread is guns.
Sure.
Gun violence, public safety as it relates to guns, and Second Amendment rights. Those things are not at odds with each other. They're not at odds. From a principle perspective, we need to have conversations about those things that the majority of us can agree on and move forward in. Set those things to the side, the things that we're not going to come to any agreement on, and work on them every day to see if we can come to some resolve on them and be reasonable and be rational and focus on moving the country forward. I think that's where we start. Now, there's some other specific policy things that we can get into at a later time, but that's where you start.
Sure. And you're the, you're the perfect person to discuss this because of the fact that you can speak directly to your experience in law enforcement, your experience as a forever Marine, and I'm sure you're concerned about your brothers and sisters out there,
I've suffered
carrying out their duties every single day.
Absolutely. For fellow police officers. Let me tell you, as a police officer, I have had to, and this is real life, real life. I was on patrol one night, myself and one officer, heard the officer go out on this guy, and then 2 seconds later, he's, I'm in a foot pursuit. That means he's chasing somebody. I'm coming around the corner, sure enough, they run in front of my car, you know what I mean? We end up out in the field wrestling with this individual. Happened to be a young Latino man. Had a gun on him. The officer and myself, we were able to take him into custody, took the gun, booked him into jail. This happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Our shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. This happened at 3 in the morning. Because it was in custody, we booked him into jail at the department that I worked at. You had to have your in-custody reports done before your tour of duty. So we had to stay a little bit later after 6 p.m. and write the report. I'm pulling out of the station at about a little bit before 7. And here comes this guy that I just wrestled down in the field, walking down the road, walked right in front of my POV, personally owned vehicle.
Sure.
And down the road, out of custody before I got off duty.
Wow.
After fleeing the police with a weapon, all of that stuff, had to wrestle him down, the whole kid and caboodle. 2 weeks later, give or take, a few weeks later, let me say that, sometime later, let me say it that way. That same young man was at a little party that they were having at this little place called Patty's Bar and Grill. My cousin, Yanika, was having her birthday party there. It was a few days before Mother's Day. Yanika's birthday was a few days before Mother's Day. In fact, it's coming up now. She's out there celebrating her birthday. This same young man is in a fight with some other guy or something happened, fighting over some girl or something. My cousin Yanika comes outside of the club, like everybody else, outside of the bar to see what's going on. The story is that he was hitting whoever this other person was with this firearm, and the firearm discharges, hits Yanika, and she falls out on the concrete out there, bleeding, dying. They knew they had to fly her out. By the time the ambulance and stuff got there, they didn't even take her to the hospital. They took her straight to the helipad. She died really before she got on the helicopter. By the time they got her to Desert Regional Medical Center, she was gone. A young woman left 2 kids. I remember doing her eulogy. Took Isaac out recently, showed her his gravesite. He met her father when we were down in Blythe. I have seen gun violence in a way that you can't imagine. A way that you can't imagine. That same young man, after that had happened, you know what he did? Got on Highway 78 and went right down, crossed that border, and hid until he had to come back and come into custody. So when you're talking about border and guns and all of this is stuff that I've lived as an officer, as a family member, it's a real conversation, and I just would hope that our politicians treat it with more respect than something used solely for political gain and posturing and gathering votes. There are people out there that have really been impacted by gun violence, and we don't have to hyperbolize and overtalk things to come to some solution. Let's get to what we can get to, make some agreements on what most of us agree to, and let's move the country forward as it relates to gun violence, gun safety, public safety, and preserving folks' rights pursuant to the Second Amendment. We can do it, and we must do it.
Sure, absolutely. Wow, I had heard those stories separately. I didn't realize that they were actually connected in terms of this young man who you actually dealt with as a police officer, and then the situation with Unica.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Jeez. Well, the fact that it has impacted you on many different levels personally, again, it makes you a great representative of the people to be able to go to Washington and make a difference in this regard. So I think we're going to leave it there for now, because we could certainly continue on this topic and go down a few roads. And I always think it's interesting when we bring folks in to talk to as well who have been impacted in one way or another by the issues that we're discussing, because at the end of the day, it's about the people that you're going to represent. So,
and I want to bring in a gun guy and a non-gun guy.
Right.
And let's have the talk.
Exactly.
We can talk. You know what I
Sure.
mean? I don't care if you're far right or far left. There are people on the left that say, no, we want to ban assault rifles. Let's bring that person in, and the person that says, hey, free for all, you can have as many guns you want as long as you want. You know what I mean? And let's have the conversation. That's how we get better as a nation. And that is the challenge that we face. Let's start the conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Quacy. And it is the challenge that we face. We are looking forward to bringing you many more episodes on the topics that are of importance in this election and just in life generally. And I want to thank you for listening and for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.